Joining us now, White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby. Admiral Kirby, welcome back.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Okay, so all of this is happening against the backdrop of trying to get a final chance at a ceasefire deal. There were reports this week, Wall Street Journal saying after months of saying a ceasefire and hostage release deal was close at hand, senior U.S. officials are now privately acknowledging they don't expect Israel and Hamas to reach an agreement before the end of President Biden's term. According to Biden administration officials, they write, Hamas makes demands and then refuses to say yes after the U.S. and Israel accept them. Is it time to accept that maybe Hamas doesn't want a deal?
It's certainly apparent to us that Mr. Sinwar remains the big obstacle here to getting a deal, and it certainly is the case that he has done nothing in the recent weeks to prove that he's willing to move this forward in a good faith way. He is the major obstacle, no question about it. And whoever that official was is right. I mean, it's tough to get him to say yes to things that he's already said he wanted. So it's very, very difficult. But as the president said the other day, you know, everything's unrealistic until all of a sudden it's not anymore. And we're going to keep trying at this. And this idea that we're just throwing up our hands and, well, it's not going to happen before the end of the term, I can tell you that is not where the president is, not where Jake Sullivan or Tony Blinken are. We still believe that there's a possibility of moving this forward, and we're going to keep trying. Those hostages need an effort to get them home. We're not going to give up on that.
Okay, so in the meantime, Israel has got numerous fronts going now. Obviously, Hamas, Hezbollah. There's a lot of pressure from the international community, from the U.S. as well. Talk of de-escalating, advising Israel against taking any further action. Our colleague Andy McCarthy, writing over at National Review, says they're paying what he calls a competency penalty for being so good at defending themselves. He says the laws of war do not outlaw victory. Honorable combatants are expected to make reasonable efforts, not the Herculean efforts Israel customarily makes, but reasonable efforts to limit civilian casualties, damage to civilian infrastructure, while nevertheless killing and capturing enemy fighters and demolishing enemy assets. So the administration says unwaveringly, unequivocally, you support Israel's right to defend itself. But there has been public and private criticism of the way that they're doing it.
Oh, of course there has been. As a matter of fact, some of that criticism, Shannon, has come from us in our conversations with our Israeli counterparts. I mean, they absolutely have a right to defend themselves, and we are still providing them the tools and capabilities to do that. But how they do it matters. President Biden has said that. Vice President Harris has said that to our Israeli counterparts. They need to be doing it in as precise and as discriminant ways to avoid damage to civilian infrastructure and, more critically, to civilian lives. So it does matter a lot to us. And again, we've been pressing that case since the beginning.
Well, and there's been reaction, obviously, to what's happened this week. Israel's not taken any formal account for those attacks involving pagers and walkie-talkies, but they have had strikes on Beirut. And with respect to that, one of them ended up taking out someone we've been after since 1983 who killed hundreds of Americans, dozens of other people in the embassy bombing, the Marine barracks bombing. Secretary Austin reportedly spoke with Israeli officials and said he's worried about escalation. And here's what former Secretary of State Pompeo's reaction was to hearing that.
Sure.
I was so disturbed. Yesterday, the Secretary of Defense, after the Israelis took out a guy who'd killed dozens and dozens of Americans in 1983 in our embassy in Beirut, who we'd been looking for decades and had a $7 million bounty on, they took him out. And our Secretary of Defense said, hey, slow down, Israelis. You're going to escalate this war. My thought would have been, thank you, Israel, for taking down someone who'd taken American lives.
And you may see this differently, but he actually thinks that some of what Israel's doing is actually going to de-escalate things because it's a warning to Hezbollah just how far inside they can reach to their organization and disrupt their communications, take out leaders, all kinds of things.
We don't believe that escalating this conflict militarily is the best way to get those families back to their kibbutzes, back to their homes and to their lives. We still believe that there is time and space for diplomacy to work here. Now, again, we're not Pollyannish. We're watching the tensions escalate here over the last few days. We understand that it's not moving in the best direction, but that doesn't mean we think that engaging in another full front, another all-out war in the north is the best thing for Israel. And with all due respect to Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Austin was delivering a message we've been delivering throughout the last few weeks to Israel about escalating this conflict up there. We don't want, and we're delivering, oh, by the way, that same message to Hezbollah and to the Lebanese government as well. Nobody, including Secretary Austin, is shedding a tear over the death of Mr. Akil, who does have American blood on his hands. I think the world's better for not having him walking around on the planet anymore. But that doesn't mean we want to see a full-out war. We don't believe, again, that that's in the best interest of the Israeli people.
So those tensions have been simmering for a long time. Obviously, Hezbollah saw an opening with the events of October 7th, began then firing its own missiles in solidarity, it says, with Hamas the very next day on October 8th. That hasn't stopped. So there are tens of thousands, some estimates 100,000 Israelis who cannot live in the north.
Yeah.
Schools closed, hospitals, all kinds of things because of this. So what is Israel to do then?
Well, first of all, obviously they have to be able to defend themselves against these attacks. And they have been since the 8th of October, as you rightly said, Shannon. We've been providing them the tools and capabilities to do that, in addition to ones they already have organically. We still believe, and we've been working at intense diplomacy here now for months to try to prevent an escalation of the conflict up at the blue line, the border with Lebanon. We still believe that there should be a stronger effort to work on that diplomacy to try to get that escalation to stop, for the situation to stabilize. We still believe, as I said, that that's the best way to get families back up to their kibbutzes and their lives and their homes. That escalating a conflict with a group like Hezbollah, who is well-resourced, well-armed, and well-supported by Iran, is not the way to get those families back home safely in anything like the near term.
Well, obviously, Iran is at the heart of what's going on in the Middle East and all of these different tension points. Our next guest, who's going to join us, Governor Doug Burgum, is just back from Israel. He says this administration is to fault for Iran now being able to foment so many and fund so many of these things. Here's what he said.
Administration is, unfrozen like $16 billion in assets. They, paid $6 billion for 5 hostages, which put a price on hostage taking, which I'm sure was part of what incentivized the record amount of hostages taken on October 7th. And then, President Trump had Iran on their knees financially, and now they've got the money to fund all of this.
Your response to that critique?
Well, we've talked about this before, and the idea that we have turned a blind eye to Iran's activities is just false. It's not true.
But that's different than easing sanctions on them. That's different. Or waivers to sanctions.
Iran is one of the most heavily sanctioned countries in the world. And that's in part, actually large part, to what President Biden has done. 600 sanctions alone, just in this administration, 60 sanction regimes. So I don't buy the argument that we somehow turned a blind eye and just given them cash. It's also not like the IRGC is taking, it was ever going to stop taking hostages or ever stop the destabilizing activities. It got so bad, Iran-backed militias supported by Iran attacking our troops in Iraq and Syria that Secretary Pompeo and the Trump administration actually almost shut down our embassy in Baghdad. So this idea that it's somehow different or new now, I just don't buy it. And the numbers don't bear it out. We're absolutely holding Iran accountable and doing it on a range of fronts, not to mention an increase in military presence in the region, which has stayed at a heightened level in just the last few months.
Well, Admiral, we know there are a lot of intractable problems in the region. We appreciate your time. Appreciate you stopping in.
Glad to be here.